There is a fortress in India so enormous, so intimidating, that invading armies once looked up at its walls and turned back before even attempting to attack. Mehrangarh Fort. A massive kingdom of stone rising 400 feet above the blue city of Jodhpur. But hidden behind those towering gates, beyond the royal courtyards, battle scars, and palace windows glowing gold above the desert, lies a story most tourists never fully hear. Because according to local legend, this fortress was cursed before construction even began. And the king built it anyway. In 1459, Rao Jodha, the powerful Rajput ruler who founded Jodhpur, decided he needed a fortress capable of protecting his growing kingdom from invasion, betrayal, and war. He chose a rocky hill overlooking the desert, a strategic location where enemies could be seen from miles away. But the land already belonged to someone else. A hermit named Nathji. Locals say the holy man had lived alone on the hill for years before soldiers arrived. And when Rao Jodha forced him to leave the mountain, the hermit reportedly turned back toward the unfinished fortress and cursed it. He warned that the kingdom would suffer drought, hardship, and instability. And then the story became even stranger. Because according to one of Rajasthan's oldest legends, the king grew so fearful of the curse that a man named Raja Ram Meghwal volunteered to sacrifice himself beneath the foundation of the fort in order to protect future generations. Buried alive inside the walls of Mehrangarh itself. And centuries later, his descendants are still reportedly honored by the royal family of Jodhpur. That alone would have been enough to turn Mehrangarh into legend. But the deeper visitors explore the fortress today, the more they begin hearing another story repeated again and again by local guides, musicians, and travelers. The fort does not feel dead. It feels inhabited by memory. The first experience visitors remember about Mehrangarh Fort is not the palace. It is the climb. The pathway leading toward the fortress rises sharply through enormous stone gates designed centuries ago to slow invading armies. Each gate carries scars from real battles, cannon impacts, iron spikes built to stop war elephants, massive wooden doors darkened by time and desert heat. The deeper travelers move into the fortress, the more impossible the structure begins to feel. Because Mehrangarh was not built like a palace. It was built like a warning. And even today, standing beneath those walls creates the strange feeling that the fort is watching the city below instead of the other way around. In the early 2020s, drone footage of Mehrangarh spread rapidly across travel videos and cinematic YouTube channels around the world. Millions of viewers watched cameras rise above the blue houses of Jodhpur before revealing the giant fortress towering above the desert cliffs. But many travelers who later visited in person admitted the scale felt completely different from what videos could capture. The fort feels heavier in real life. Older. More emotionally charged. Some tourists described entering expecting another beautiful historical attraction, only to become unexpectedly affected by the atmosphere once they reached the upper palace levels. The silence inside certain chambers feels strangely dense despite the crowds outside. Narrow corridors suddenly open into royal courtyards glowing beneath warm Rajasthan sunlight. Wind moves constantly through carved windows overlooking the blue city far below while distant traditional music echoes across the stone halls. And then visitors begin noticing the details that stay with them afterward. The handprints. Near one of the gates, small handprints remain pressed into the stone walls by royal women centuries ago before committing suttee following the deaths of their husbands. Some tourists reportedly stop speaking entirely when local guides explain their meaning. What initially felt like a beautiful fortress suddenly becomes deeply human. These were not legends. These were real people who lived, loved, feared, sacrificed, and died inside these walls. That emotional shift appears repeatedly in modern travel experiences surrounding Mehrangarh. Visitors arrive expecting history. Then slowly realize they are walking through accumulated human emotion preserved inside stone. One traveler visiting during 2022 described hearing traditional Rajasthani musicians performing inside one of the palace courtyards while sunset light poured across the carved walls above the city. He later admitted the experience felt almost surreal, less like visiting a museum and more like accidentally stepping into another century where the fort had briefly come alive again. And perhaps that feeling is exactly why Mehrangarh affects people so strongly. Because unlike abandoned ruins frozen in silence, this fortress still breathes. But the deeper mystery of Mehrangarh begins beneath the fortress itself. Because local legend says the curse of the hermit terrified Rao Jodha far more than he publicly admitted. According to stories passed through Rajasthan for generations, the king feared the holy man's words would doom the future of his kingdom. Droughts could destroy trade routes. Failed harvests could weaken armies. Water shortages could collapse the city entirely. And in the harsh deserts of Rajasthan, survival depended on controlling both land and fortune. So the king searched for a solution. That is when the story of Raja Ram Meghwal emerged. According to local accounts, a man volunteered to sacrifice himself alive beneath the foundation of the fort so the curse would not destroy future generations. Different versions of the legend exist, but many describe the same core idea. The man willingly allowed himself to be entombed within the structure as construction continued above him. And what makes the story psychologically powerful is not whether modern historians can prove it happened exactly as described. It is the fact that the descendants of Raja Ram Meghwal were reportedly granted land and honored by the royal family afterward for generations. That detail changes everything. Because suddenly the story no longer feels like pure mythology. It feels connected to real memory. And this is where Mehrangarh becomes more than simply a beautiful fort. It becomes a fortress carrying unresolved emotional tension beneath its walls. Did the sacrifice work? Was the curse ever truly broken? Some locals quietly point toward the hardships that continued affecting the region afterward: droughts, wars, invasions, political instability. Others dismiss the curse entirely and treat the story as symbolic rather than literal. But even today, guides inside the fort still retell the legend carefully, almost respectfully, especially near the sections associated with the foundation of the fortress. And the atmosphere there feels different. Visitors often describe the lower sections of Mehrangarh as unexpectedly heavy emotionally compared to the bright palace courtyards above. The deeper stone chambers remain cooler, darker, quieter. Footsteps echo longer. Conversations soften naturally. The fortress slowly shifts from royal spectacle into something older and stranger. One traveler during the late 2010s reportedly asked a local guide whether he personally believed the curse story. The guide laughed at first, then paused, and finally answered, "Whether the curse is real or not, nobody here disrespects it." That single sentence stayed with the traveler longer than anything else he saw inside the fort. Because fear becomes more convincing when it survives among people already familiar with the place. But perhaps the most fascinating part of Mehrangarh is how suddenly the fortress changes personality depending on where you stand inside it. From the outside, the fort feels aggressive, military, untouchable. The giant walls rise directly from the cliffs like part of the mountain itself. Ancient cannons still face outward toward the desert horizon. Massive gates climb one after another toward the palace while steep pathways force visitors upward exactly as invading armies once experienced centuries ago. Then the palace interior reveals something completely different. Delicate mirror rooms. Hidden balconies. Intricate carvings. Royal cradles preserved behind glass. Silk chambers glowing beneath warm lantern light. And suddenly the fortress no longer feels like a machine of war. It feels intimate. Human. Almost painfully human. Because inside these walls lived rulers carrying ambitions large enough to build one of the greatest fortresses in India, yet also private enough to fall in love, grieve, fear betrayal, celebrate victories, and suffer heartbreak beneath the same ceilings tourists photograph today. And nowhere does that emotional contrast feel stronger than during sunset. Travelers repeatedly describe the final hour before evening as the moment Mehrangarh becomes unforgettable. Warm golden light floods through lattice windows overlooking the blue city below. Desert wind moves softly through the battlements high above Rajasthan while musicians perform traditional songs inside ancient courtyards. Shadows stretch across palace floors once walked by kings centuries earlier. Then slowly, the city below begins glowing blue beneath the coming night. And for a few moments, the fortress stops feeling historical altogether. It feels alive. One visitor in 2021 described standing near the upper walls during sunset while listening to local musicians play beneath the palace arches. He later admitted the experience unexpectedly affected him emotionally because the fort suddenly felt suspended between centuries, ancient and modern existing together at the same time. That emotional layering is what makes Mehrangarh different from ordinary travel destinations. The fortress constantly shifts between beauty and violence, love and sacrifice, royal power and human fragility. And the deeper people emotionally enter the experience, the harder it becomes to forget. There are places in the world people visit because they are famous. Mehrangarh becomes something else entirely. Because long after travelers leave Jodhpur, what stays with them is rarely a single photograph or historical detail. It is the feeling of the fortress watching over the blue city beneath the desert sky. The feeling of climbing through gates scarred by centuries of war. The feeling of hearing local musicians perform inside palace courtyards while sunlight burns gold across ancient stone. The feeling of standing inside a fortress supposedly built upon a curse, and realizing the stories surrounding it never completely disappeared. And perhaps that is why Mehrangarh continues surviving so powerfully inside human imagination. Because the fort contains contradiction everywhere. A kingdom built for war that now inspires awe. A cursed hill transformed into one of India's greatest landmarks. A sacrifice meant to protect future generations. Love stories surviving beside stories of conquest. Silence existing beside music still echoing through the palace halls. Everything inside Mehrangarh feels suspended between beauty and tension. Even today, some guides still lower their voices while discussing the buried sacrifice beneath the foundation. Travelers still stop quietly before the ancient handprints pressed into the walls centuries ago. Visitors still describe the strange emotional heaviness inside certain palace corridors despite the beauty surrounding them. And once night finally arrives over Jodhpur, the fortress changes again. The blue city glows beneath the darkness while Mehrangarh rises above it, illuminated against the desert sky like something timeless watching over Rajasthan from another age. Not abandoned. Not haunted. Remembered. And somewhere beneath those enormous walls built more than 5 centuries ago, the story of the curse still survives. The world is filled with forgotten kingdoms, hidden stories, ancient fortresses, sacred mountains, and places where history still feels emotionally alive centuries later. And somewhere out there, another mystery is still waiting. Subscribe to Tilt and Chill, and together we'll continue exploring the world's most cinematic places, emotional legends, and unforgettable mysteries, one journey at a time.